You, Navy SEAL. Don't make me laugh, you're just a cheap mechanic, he sneered, pressing the cold barrel against her forehead. None of the men around him knew the same hands they mocked had once trained soldiers to shoot dive and kill in the dark. When he pulled the trigger, the gun jammed not by accident, but because she'd removed the safety mechanism while he was bragging. She lifted her head, voice low and calm. I taught you how to stay alive. Too bad you never learned. A second later, the man who mocked her collapsed, and the mechanic stood firing with the precision only a Navy SEAL could possess. The cold grip of the man's panic on his face as the hammer fell on an empty chamber was a far greater weapon than the gun itself. Kayla had learned years ago in the desert that an enemy's belief in his own invincibility was the deepest canyon from which he could never climb out. She hadn't just removed the safety, she'd leveraged his entire personality against him. Lucindre, with his preening self-importance and the way he held the weapon too loosely, convinced the world he was a lethal threat, yet he was nothing more than a brittle piece of stagecraft. She'd spent 3 agonizing minutes during his drunken tirade observing the minute ticks in his forearm, the cadence of his breath, the subtle shift in his weight, all the tells that signaled he was performing for his henchmen, not truly ready to commit murder. Her mind cataloged these weaknesses with the same detached thoroughness she used to inspect a faulty engine, confirming his demise was not an act of chance, but a mechanical inevitability she had engineered. She stepped over his twitching body, not with haste, but with the measured contempt due to a poorly calibrated instrument. The rain was coming down hard that night at Varen's shipyard, soaking Kayla Wintrin's plain gray hoodie as she crouched under the rusted hull of a cargo ship. Her hands, calloused and smeared with grease, worked fast on a propeller shaft. The clank of her wrench echoed across the empty dock. She looked like any other mechanic, hair tied back in a messy bun, no makeup, boots scuffed from years of hard work. Nobody would have guessed she was born into one of the richest families in the country, raised in a mansion with chandeliers and private tutors who taught her to sit straight and speak softly. But Kayla never cared for that life. She'd traded silk dresses for oil-stained jeans long ago, and she liked it that way. The shipyard was quiet except for the rain and the distant hum of a generator. Then, out of nowhere, boots crunched on the gravel behind her. She didn't turn. Not yet. The propeller shaft adjustment was merely a visible distraction. Her true objective had been the ship's engine control unit nested deep within a barely accessible service duct. While appearing to tune the mechanical balance, Kayla had executed a surgical override, splicing a small, custom-built quantum relay into the main fuel line regulator. This device wasn't meant to halt the ship, but to subtly alter the viscosity of the fuel blend, forcing the massive engines to burn slightly richer than specification. The change was tiny, undetectable to standard diagnostics, yet profound. It ensured that 3 hours into the planned voyage, the ship would experience catastrophic non-lethal engine failure in the exact center of a contested international zone, a perfect ambush point for the authorities she had secretly contacted. The greasy water pooling at her feet, she thought, was far less toxic than the cargo Dax Corin intended to smuggle. She resecured the panel, the wrench's final thunk, signaling that the mechanical stage of the trap was complete, and she was now ready for the human element to spring the rest. A flashlight beam hit her back, sharp and blinding. "Hey you!" a voice barked, rough and full of itself. It was Lucindre, 33. All swagger and sharp cheekbones, the kind of guy who wore tailored suits to a shipyard just to feel superior. He was Dax Corin's right-hand man, a mercenary who loved the sound of his own voice. "What's a girl like you doing out here alone? Stealing parts, or you just lost?" He kicked over a bucket of oil, letting it spill across the wet ground, black and slick under the dock lights. Kayla's fingers paused on the wrench. She set it down slowly, her movements deliberate, like she was folding a napkin. "Fixing your ship," she said, voice steady, not looking up. "It's done." Lucin laughed, a mean, guttural sound. He stepped closer, his polished shoes splashing in the oil. "Fixing my ship? Look at you. You're nobody. You're nothing." 2 other men stepped out from the shadows, both in black tactical gear, their faces hard and unreadable. They were Dax's muscle, hired for loyalty, and not much else. One of them, a stocky guy with a buzz cut, snorted. "She looks like she crawled out of a dumpster. You sure she's not here to beg for scraps?" The other one smirked, leaning against a crate. Nah, she's probably smuggling something. Check her bag. Lucen grabbed Kayla's canvas backpack from the ground, ripping it open. Tools and a half-eaten sandwich spilled out. "This is it," he said, holding up the sandwich like it was evidence. Pathetic. Kayla stood wiping her hands on her jeans. She was tall but not imposing, with a quiet beauty that didn't scream for attention. Her face was bare, her hazel eyes sharp but calm, like still water hiding a current. "You're wasting my time," she said, reaching for her bag. Lucen yanked it back, tossing it to the buzz cut guy. "Wasting your time? Oh, sweetheart, you're in our world now." He pulled a pistol from his waistband, pressing it against her forehead. The metal was cold, the rain making it slick. "Tell me what you're really doing here. You think you can mess with Dax Corin's shipment?" The other two laughed, circling her like wolves. One of them grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back. "Talk or we make this quick," he hissed. She didn't flinch. Her eyes locked on Lucen's, unblinking even as the gun pressed harder. The rain ran down her face, mixing with the oil on her cheek. "You don't want to do this," she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Lucen leaned in, his breath hot with whiskey. "Oh, I really do. Name. Now. Or this bullet's gonna do the talking." The air was heavy, the dock silent except for the rain and the faint creak of the ship. Kayla's lips parted, but she said nothing. Then, in one fluid motion, her wrist twisted, snapping the zip tie like it was string. She grabbed Lucen's gun hand, redirecting it upward as the trigger clicked empty. She'd slipped the safety pin out while he was taunting her. Before he could react, she drove her elbow into his jaw, dropping him to the wet ground. The other two lunged, but Kayla was faster. She sidestepped Buzzcut, using his momentum to slam him into a crate. The second guy swung a knife, but she caught his wrist, twisting until he yelped and dropped it. She kicked the knife into the water, then grabbed Lucen's fallen pistol. In 3 seconds, the dock was quiet again, the men groaning in the mud. Kayla stood over them, rain dripping from her hood. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. From the shadows, a new figure emerged. Dax Corin himself. 38, lean and sharp in a black coat, his eyes cold as the steel he traded in. "Impressive," he said, clapping slowly. "But you're still just a girl in over her head." He nodded to his men, who were scrambling to their feet. "Tie her up. Properly this time." Dax stepped closer, stopping only when the scent of Kayla's work grease hit his nostrils, a visceral contrast to his cologne. His smile was not mocking, but predatory, the kind that assessed risk and opportunity simultaneously. "Wintrin," he said, not as a question, but a statement, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial murmur. "The prodigal daughter of the Wintrin group. I recognized your jawline from the society pages, the same one that looks so good on your father's campaign posters. Tell me, did they kick you out of the yacht club for being poor? Or did Daddy send you down here to play revolutionary?" He tilted his head, watching for any flicker of shame, any break in the facade that would tell him she was soft beneath the grime. The fact that the daughter of his most powerful potential rival was kneeling at his feet, framed as a low-life saboteur, was a twist of fate he intended to savor and exploit. Kayla merely met his gaze, her eyes utterly devoid of connection, treating his mention of her family as irrelevant noise, a broken radio signal she had long ago tuned out. They bound her hands with electrical cord, forcing her to her knees in a puddle of oil and rainwater. Dax crouched in front of her, his face inches from hers. "You think you're clever, huh? Messing with my ship's GPS? You're no mechanic. Who sent you?" Kayla's eyes met his, steady, unafraid. She didn't answer. Lucen, rubbing his jaw, spat at her feet. "She's nobody, boss. Just some wannabe tough girl." Dax tilted his head, studying her like a puzzle. "Nobody doesn't move like that. Nobody doesn't break zip ties." He stood wiping his hands on a handkerchief. "Let's see how quiet she stays when we're done with her." He turned to walk away, but Kayla's voice cut through the rain. "You're not as smart as you think, Dax." He froze, his shoulders tensing. She didn't say another word. She didn't need to. The men dragged her to a crate, slamming her against it. Lucan pressed the gun to her temple again, his face red with anger. "Say your name, or I blow your brains out." Kyla's lips twitched, almost a smile. "You already pulled that trigger once," she said. "Try again." Lucen's finger tightened, but before he could act, Kayla jerked her head, slamming it into his nose. He stumbled back, cursing. She twisted her wrists again, the cord snapping. In the chaos, she grabbed the pistol, fired a single shot into the dock's main light, plunging everything into darkness. The men shouted, scrambling, but Kayla was already gone. When the lights flickered back on, all that was left was a trail of oil and a message carved into a container. Tell Dax. The ghost of Yemen remembers. By morning, Varen Bay was buzzing. Dax had taken to the dark web, spreading her name like Poison Kayla Wintrin, traitor deserter, the SEAL who betrayed her team. The local news picked it up, plastering her face across screens, her mugshot from years ago, her eyes cold and unflinching. Wanted Kayla Wintrin, $5 million reward, the headline screamed. At the diner where Kayla used to grab coffee, the waitress, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes, shook her head at the TV. She seemed so nice, she muttered, wiping down the counter. Always tipped, never complained. A trucker at the bar snorted. Nice. She killed her own commander. Oren Voss was a hero. She's trash. Kayla, standing outside, heard every word through the open window. Her fingers tightened around the old Seal 8 dagger in her pocket, the blade etched with her team's number. The woman in the designer coat, the one who smirked and told Kayla she didn't belong, was Eleanor Roth, once Kayla's closest friend, and now the public face of her family's charitable foundation. Eleanor, poised and flawlessly manicured, was waiting for her yacht that morning, holding a large, brightly colored newspaper that featured Kayla's mugshot directly below a column detailing Eleanor's latest gala success. When Kayla's approach forced the woman to look up, the mask of society peeled back instantly, replaced by a pure, horrified contempt that transcended mere public judgment. Eleanor did not just see a wanted fugitive. She saw the messy reminder of the life she chose to abandon. It's true, then. Eleanor stated, her voice trembling, not with fear, but a self-righteous rage that sought to distance itself. You finally ruined yourself, Kayla. My mother always said you preferred gutters to gold. You had a chance to be respectable, to honor your name, and you chose this. She gestured around the oil-slicked docks with a gloved hand. Kayla stepped past her, her movement smooth and economical, but paused just close enough for Eleanor to smell the faint traces of gunpowder and diesel on her clothes, a scent of the life Eleanor would never comprehend. You chose a coward's peace, Eleanor. Kayla replied, the quiet finality of the statement, severing a relationship years dead, before continuing toward the pier. She walked to the pier, her boots heavy on the wooden boards. The reward had turned the city against her. Cops patrolled the streets, their radios crackling with her description. A group of dock workers spotted her, one pointing. That's her, the traitor. They didn't approach, but their glares followed her, sharp as knives. A woman in a designer coat waiting for her yacht smirked as Kayla passed. You don't belong here, she said loud enough for the crowd to hear. Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. Kayla stopped, her head turning slightly. Funny. She said, her voice calm but cutting. I was thinking the same about you. The woman's face reddened, but she had no comeback. Kayla kept walking her steps, even her face unreadable. That night, Kayla slipped into an old warehouse, her temporary safe house. She sat on a crate, her hands steady as she cleaned her dagger. A burner phone buzzed in her bag. It was Jex Marrow 27, a wiry hacker with a nervous laugh and a debt to Kayla for saving his life in Yemen. Check your drop, he said, his voice low. Kayla pulled a USB from a hidden pocket in her bag. She plugged it into a battered laptop, and a CIA file loaded a decrypted report labeled Cerberus. Her eyes scanned the screen, stopping on one line, Oren Voss, alive. The explosion that killed her team, that pinned the blame on her, was a setup. Dax had orchestrated it to steal a weapon prototype her team was guarding. Her jaw tightened, her fingers brushing the dagger's engraving. The conversation with Jex and Ronan was a clipped high-stakes brief, conducted entirely through encrypted text that scrolled across Kayla's laptop screen, punctuated by the occasional flicker of the warehouse's faulty neon bulb. Jex had not only confirmed Voss was a captive, but had also uncovered a secondary devastating layer to the Cerberus operation. Dax wasn't just stealing a weapon. He was planning to activate it during the gala as a demonstration to a foreign buyer, ensuring maximum political chaos. This required an active military-grade decoy to be deployed far from the gala to split Dax's security response. Ronan, who was already en route, proposed using a decommissioned Coast Guard cutter, loaded with sensor jamming equipment and remotely piloted to draw the bulk of the firepower to the abandoned northern docks. Kayla, however, typed out a single amendment. No cutter, too slow. Use the satellite relay I built into Corin's cargo ship's fuel line. It fails in 4 hours. That's our decoy's ignition point. Jex instantly recognized the audacity and precision of the plan. The earlier sabotage was now the centerpiece of the counter-offensive, sacrificing a tactical escape route for strategic supremacy. Kayla leaned back, the warehouse's damp air heavy around her. She remembered Oren's voice, gruff but warm, teaching her to tie a knot on a training boat years ago. "You're tougher than you look," Wintron he'd said, tossing her a rope. The memory dissolved as she stood, slipping the dagger into her boot. She flipped on an old military radio, her movements precise. "Ghost calling Falcon," she whispered into the mic. "Time for resurrection." The line crackled and a voice answered, Ronan Vale, her old teammate, the one she thought was dead. "Copy, Ghost. I'm coming." Kayla's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't trust easily, not anymore, but Ronan's voice was a lifeline. The next night, Kayla stood outside the Aegis Charity Gala, a glittering event in a glass-walled skyscraper overlooking Varan Bay. She'd swapped her hoodie for a plain black jumpsuit, posing as a maintenance worker. Her hair was tucked under a cap, her face clean but bare. The gala was Dax's stage, a place to flaunt his power while hiding his weapons deals. Kayla slipped inside, carrying a toolbox, her eyes scanning the room. Chandeliers sparkled, waiters weaved through crowds of men in tuxes and women in gowns. She moved quietly, checking a vent near the stage, her hands steady. Then a voice cut through the chatter. "You, what are you doing here?" It was Lucen, his suit pristine, his eyes narrowing as he recognized her. The room turned, heads swiveled, glasses clinked as they were set down. Lucen grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he called, his voice dripping with venom, "meet Kayla. Wintron, the traitor who killed her own team." The crowd gasped, phones coming out to record. A woman in a red gown, her face Botox smooth and status obsessed, laughed sharply. She looks like a janitor. A man in a tailored suit, his cufflinks glinting, leaned forward. "What's she doing here? Begging for a job." The laughter spread cold and cruel. Kayla stood still, her hands loose at her sides. A security guard grabbed her, forcing her to her knees in the center of the stage. Dax stepped forward, his smile sharp as a blade. "A seal, huh, Q Neal? You're nothing now." As the security guard shoved Kayla toward the stage, her gaze briefly swept past a polished stainless steel janitorial cart, positioned strategically near the building's main fire suppression cabinet. She had wheeled that cart there herself 30 minutes earlier, meticulously positioning its wide rubber wheels to block the emergency water valve. The woman in the red gown, still giggling at the janitor insult, took a sip of her champagne, just as Ronan's team made their shattering entry through the glass facade. The sudden concussive sound triggered the building's internal security protocol, a secondary pressurized foam-based fire suppression system, separate from the water lines Kayla had blocked. The foam jets, designed to target major electronic areas instead, sprayed the entire gala floor, instantly coating the polished marble silk dresses and tailored suits in a slick, rapidly expanding layer of dense white chemically adhesive foam. The laughter died, replaced by shrill screams of panic and outrage, as the wealthy, now covered in sticky, expensive-smelling residue, slid and stumbled across the floor Kayla had just made dangerously slick. Glass shattered as Ronan Vale and his team burst through the windows, tactical gear glinting under the chandeliers. The crowd screamed, scattering. Dax fired at Kayla, but she rolled across the stage, grabbing Lucen's silver pistol from his holster, the same one he'd pressed to her head. She didn't fire. She didn't need to. Ronan's team had the room under control. Dax's face twisted, his confidence cracking. "You're dead!" he shouted, but his voice shook. Kayla stood, the pistol loose in her hand. "Not yet," she said, her eyes locked on his. The crowd parted as Ronan approached, his face weathered but familiar. He didn't look at Dax. He looked at Kayla, nodding once. She nodded back. The room knew who she was now. Dax slipped out in the chaos, Lucan at his side. They grabbed Kayla as she helped Ronan dodge a grenade. In a basement room, they tied her to a steel chair, the air thick with the smell of rust and sweat. Dax leaned close, his voice low. "Your team died because of you. All of them. You're poison." Lucen flipped on a stun baton, its crackle loud in the small room. "Let's see how tough a SEAL really is," he said, pressing it to her side. Kayla's body tensed, her lips bleeding as she bit down, but her eyes never left Dax. "You're running out of time," she said, her voice steady despite the pain. Dax laughed, but it was forced. "You'll break," he said. "Everyone does." Lucen, his face a mask of sweating, psychotic triumph, brought the stun baton down a second time, aiming for her neck. This time, Kayla didn't just endure. She used the involuntary spasm of her abdominal muscles, triggered by the first shock, to execute a tiny vertical shift. Simultaneously, her right hand, hidden by the chair's dark shadow, slid a sliver of hardened steel, a dismantled zipper pull she'd swallowed days ago, from her molar, securing it between her two forefingers. As Lucen leaned in his mouth, open to deliver a verbal barb, Kayla whipped her head back, not into his nose this time, but directly into his throat, hitting the precise spot just beneath the chin that causes temporary laryngeal paralysis. Lucen dropped the baton, clutching his throat, his face turning an alarming purple as he gasped silently for air. Kayla then used the minute gap in the electrical cord, created by her earlier struggle, to scrape the steel sliver against the internal wires, not cutting, but creating a slow, controlled short circuit that began to hiss and smoke, broadcasting her distress signal locally, while systematically burning through the restraints. Kayla's head dipped, her breathing shallow. She looked broken. Then her teeth clicked, biting through a capsule hidden in a molar. A signal pulsed out, faint, but enough. The ceiling exploded, smoke flooding the room as Jex's drones swooped in, dropping nets. Ronan charged through, cutting her free. Kayla grabbed Lucen's baton, slamming it into his knee. He screamed, collapsing. Jex's drones recorded everything, streaming it to military networks. The footage hit the dark web first, then the news. Kayla Wintron, no traitor, but a hero framed. Dax bolted, his coat flapping as he ran for the docks. Kayla followed, blood seeping from her shoulder, her steps unsteady but sure. At the pier, Dax boarded a sleek ship, its hull loaded with smuggled weapons. He screamed into the radio, "You'll die with me!" SEAL Kayla climbed aboard, her boots slipping on the wet deck. Dax aimed his gun at her head, his hand shaking. "Kneel!" he roared, his voice cracking. Kayla's hand moved to her belt, unclipping a titanium SEAL 8 badge that gleamed in the moonlight. "If you aim at my head," she said, her voice calm, "you'd better not miss." Dax fired. The bullet ricocheted off her experimental SEAL armor, a prototype she'd designed years ago. She lunged, knocking him down. Her pistol fired once, the bullet carving through his Black Aegis emblem, shutting down the ship's controls. The explosion lit up Varen Bay, flames dancing on the water. Kayla dove into the sea, her body cutting through the waves. Ronan's helicopter swooped low, pulling her aboard. She sat back, her chest heaving, the SEAL 8 badge still in her hand. The city below was waking up to the truth. Lucen was arrested, his face on every screen as the traitor who tortured a hero. The woman in the red gown lost her sponsorship deal, her name trending for all the wrong reasons. The man with the cufflinks was fired, his firm cutting ties after the gala footage leaked. Dax's empire crumbled, his name now a warning. Kayla didn't look back. She didn't need to. The gold of the morning sun caught the dockside diner, illuminating the tired face of the trucker who had so loudly condemned her as trash. He sat in his usual booth, nursing a coffee, watching the morning news reports that lauded Kayla Wintron as a national hero. The waitress, the same one who had once defended Kayla's quiet demeanor, set a replacement mug of coffee down on the counter and pointed to the television screen with her rag. The segment was running Dax Corin's financial records, meticulously detailing how his complex web of shell companies had been completely unwound overnight. And one piece of information buried deep in a tax evasion disclosure flashed briefly across the screen, a small but significant loan that the trucker Gary Jenkins had taken out years ago, using his home as collateral, a loan that was now revealed to be fraudulently held by one of Dax Corin's now defunct holding corporations. His entire life was tied to the collapsed empire. The trucker choked on his coffee, his face draining of color, as he realized that the woman he called trash, the woman he publicly wished ruin upon, was the only reason his fraudulent mortgage had been exposed, simultaneously destroying the criminal who controlled it. He looked up at the waitress, the arrogance gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening understanding of his own unwitting involvement and utter public humiliation. The sun rose over Varan Bay, casting gold across the water. Kayla stood at the edge of the dock, her hoodie back on the badge now hanging around her neck. She'd been judged, mocked, hunted, but she'd walked through it all, her silence louder than their lies. She wasn't broken. She wasn't alone. The ghost had come home. And those, where are you watching from? Leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, betrayal, and finally healing.